Nobody was supposed to find out. That was the rule. That was the understanding. What happened inside those hospital walls during those quiet, heavy days was meant to stay buried, locked behind duty and silence, and the kind of loyalty that royal household demand without ever speaking it aloud. But one man could not stay quiet anymore. He had stood at the door for hours. He had watched. He had heard things, and after months of crying it alone, the weight had become too much. When he finally spoke, that words came out slowly, like he had said them in his head 100 times and was still terrified to say them. What he revealed would make Cat break down in a way the world had never seen her break before. This is that story, and if you have been following along with story like this one, real, emotional, deeply human moment from behind the palace wall, make sure you subscribe, hit the bell because what comes next in this story is something you will not want to miss.
It was January, the kind of January that settles into your bones. London was gray and cold, and the streets outside the London Clinic were quiet in that particular way that tells you something serious is happening nearby. Kate had been admitted quietly. No grand announcement. Just a carefully worded statement, abdominal surgery, planned, precautionary. The palace used words like those to soften the edges of things, to keep the public calm, to keep the cameras at a respectful distance. But behind those words was a woman in a hospital bed, pale and frightened in ways she would never let herself show publicly. She had 3 children who needed her, a husband who was carrying his own invisible storm, and a diagnosis that hadn't fully revealed itself yet, not to the world, and perhaps not fully to her. The room she was in was private. Small, clean, softly lit. There were flowers on the windowsill, white ones, chosen carefully by staff who understood that color and detail still mattered even in crisis. A television was mounted to the wall but rarely turned on. She preferred quiet. The guard stationed outside her door, we'll call him Thomas, because his real name has never been confirmed publicly, had been selected specifically for this post. He was experienced, discreet, former military, with the kind of posture that said he had stood in difficult places before and never flinched. He took his position seriously. Every hour, same routine. Eyes forward, breathing steady, mind clear. But on the 3rd day, something shifted. It started with footsteps, ones he hadn't been told to expect. Heels on hospital flooring. Purposeful, quick, he straightened. Instinctively, the woman who came around the corner was not Kate's scheduled visitor. She was not a nurse. She was not a doctor. She was Camilla. Thomas felt something tighten in his chest. Not alarm exactly, but alertness. The kind that comes when something doesn't match the plan you've been given. He had a list. A clear, approved list of visitors. Camilla was not on it. She moved with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. She wore a dark coat, her expression unreadable, and she was alone. No aide, no assistant trailing behind her. That was unusual. That was the first thing Thomas noted. She stopped a few feet from the door. "I'd like a moment," she said simply. Thomas held his ground. "Ma'am, I'll need to confer with. I won't be long." Her tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. There was something underneath it, something flat and final that wasn't quite warmth and wasn't quite a coldness either. He made the call. He followed protocol. And the answer he received surprised him. He was told to step aside, so he did. He moved. He let her pass. He stood just beyond the door as it closed softly behind her. And then, in the silence of that corridor, he listened. What he heard through that door was not an argument. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't loud, but something about it made the hairs on his arms rise slowly, the way they do when you sense, without being able to explain it, that something is very, very wrong. The door was thick. Solid wood, the kind built not just for privacy, but for soundproofing. The kind that tells you that people inside have things they don't want the world to hear. But Thomas was trained. He had learned, without ever being taught directly, how to make his senses work for him. How to stand close enough without appearing to. How to let sound travel. The voices were low, controlled. There was no shouting. This wasn't that kind of scene. What came through the door instead was something quieter and, in some ways, harder to process. Camilla's voice was measured. Each sentence placed carefully, like objects being arranged on a shelf. Thomas couldn't catch every word, but he caught enough. He heard the word arrangements more than once. He heard the phrase, "What comes next?" He heard something that sounded like the children will need to understand. Though he told himself later he might have misheard that part. He wanted to have misheard that part. What he heard most clearly, the sentence that would lodge in him and refuse to leave, was this: "You need to let William carry this now. That's what's best for everyone." Then silence. A long one. The kind that means the person on the receiving end doesn't have an answer, or has one they're choosing not to give. Then Camilla again, softer this time. Almost gentle. Almost. "I'm only saying what no one else has the courage to say to you." Thomas stared at the wall across from him. His jaw tightened. He had no right to feel what he was feeling. It wasn't his family, wasn't his life. He was a guard. Eyes forward, breathing steady. But he was also a human being. And something in those words felt like a door being opened that shouldn't have been opened. Not here, not now. Not while she was still in a hospital bed recovering from surgery with a diagnosis. She was still learning to carry. The visit lasted 11 minutes, he counted. When Camilla emerged, she adjusted her coat. She looked at Thomas briefly, not unkindly, but not warmly either. The look of a woman who had said what she came to say and considered the matter handled. She left the way she came, heels on flooring. Quick, purposeful, gone. Thomas stood there for a moment. Then he opened the door gently, the way you open a door when you're not sure what you'll find on the other side. Kate was sitting up in the bed. Her hands were folded in her lap. She was looking at the window, at those white flowers on the sill, at the gray London sky beyond. Her face was composed, careful, the face she had spent years learning to wear. But her eyes were too bright. That specific kind of brightness that comes just before tears that a person refuses to let fall. She turned when she heard him step in. "Everything all right?" she asked. Her voice was steady, almost. Thomas nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Is there anything you need?" She looked at him for a moment longer than usual. Just a beat. The kind of pause that says there is something I need, but not from you, and not in words. "No," she said quietly. "Thank you." He stepped back out. He closed the door. He returned to his position, eyes forward, breathing steady. But for the rest of that shift, and many shifts after, he thought about those 11 minutes. He thought about what a woman fighting for her health should and shouldn't have to hear while lying in a hospital bed. He thought about the weight of that silence after Camilla's words. He thought about the way Kate's hands had been folded in her lap, too still, too deliberate. The way you hold yourself together when something has just cracked inside you and you can't let it show. He told no one. Immediately. He was loyal. He was professional, but loyalty, he would come to understand, has a limit. And the truth, even when no one is asking for it, has a strange way of demanding to be known. Weeks would pass. Then months. Kate would go home. Then she would face the world again bravely, quietly, the way she always did. And then one day, something would change. Something would happen that would bring it all to the surface. The moment Kate broke down was still coming, but it was getting closer.
Cat goes home after surgery but can't stop thinking about what Camilla said in the hospital room. She tries to heal, be a good mom, and stay strong. She even records her cancer announcement bravely, but deep inside those 11 minutes still bother her. She can't let it go.
She went home in February. The statement from the palace was brief and warm. Kate was recovering well, in good spirits, grateful for the kindness of the public. There was a photo released a few weeks later. She was outdoors, wrapped in a coat, smiling beside William. The photo was meant to reassure. It did for most people, but photos only show what they're meant to show. Inside the walls of Adelaide Cottage, life was quieter and heavier than any camera could capture. The children moved carefully around her at first, the way children do when they sense their parent is fragile, but don't have the words to name it. George, the oldest, had started setting the table without being asked. Charlotte had taken to bringing her mother drawings unprompted. Small crayon scenes of gardens and sunshine and their family together. Louis still climbed onto the sofa beside her and pressed himself against her arm the way he always had. Unbothered by whatever the adults around him were carrying. Those children were her anchor. When everything else felt uncertain, they were the thing that made sense. But the nights were harder. William has never spoken publicly about those nights, but people close to the household have said quietly, carefully, that he watched her. Not intrusively, not anxiously, but with the specific attentiveness of a person who loves someone and is afraid and is trying not to let that fear become another burden for the person they love. He knew something had happened at the hospital beyond the surgery. He didn't know the details. Not yet Kate hadn't told him about Camilla's visit. This wasn't dishonesty. It was something more complicated than that. It was the instinct of a woman who had spent years absorbing difficult things privately, processing them, smoothing them down into something manageable before bringing them to anyone else. She had learned partly through yoke, experience, and partly through the demands of the life she had chosen that some things needed to be carried alone. First, but Camilla's words hadn't smoothed down the way Kate had expected them to. You need to let William carry this now. That's what's best for everyone. She turned that sentence over in quiet moments. In the bath. In the early morning before the children woke. In the car when the radio was low and the road was long. What had Camilla meant? The most charitable reading was that it was concern, perhaps clumsy, perhaps poorly timed, but concern nonetheless. An older woman telling a younger one not to carry too much alone, to lean on her husband. But there was another reading. A colder one. The one Kate kept returning to despite herself. What comes next? The arrangements? What's best for everyone? Had Camilla come to the hospital, not out of warmth, but out of what? Strategy. A quiet repositioning while Kate was at her most vulnerable. Of where power and presence and narrative should sit within the family. Kate didn't want to believe that. She was not a suspicious person by nature. She was, by most accounts, someone who extended good faith even when it cost her. But the hospital visit had unsettled something deep. Something she couldn't quite name. In March, she recorded her cancer announcement. She sat in a garden Windsor, soft light, the kind of setting chosen to feel gentle. She wrote her own words. She spoke directly, quietly, with a steadiness that moved millions of people watching around the world. She didn't mention the fear. She didn't mention the nights. She didn't mention a visit from a woman in a dark coat 11 minutes long. She said she was taking each day as it came. She asked for privacy for her children. She thanked people for their kindness. The response was overwhelming. Love poured in from everywhere. Letters, flowers, messages, and amid all of it, Kate felt grateful. She did. She was not a woman without perspective or grace, but underneath the gratitude, quietly and persistently, the question remained, and it would take one phone call months later, from a number she didn't immediately recognize. To bring everything to the surface, Thomas had finally decided to speak. The call didn't come to Kate directly. That wasn't how these things worked. There were layers between a palace guard and a princess of Wales, formal channels, assistants, protocols built over generations to ensure that access was controlled and information moved only where it was meant to move. But Thomas had grown tired of formal channels. He had tried them. Quietly, carefully, in the months after Kate left the hospital, he had raised what he witnessed with a senior colleague. He had chosen his words with precision. He had not been dramatic. He had simply stated what he saw and what he heard and suggested that perhaps someone should know. The response he received was courteous and swift and said nothing at all. The kind of response that is designed to make a person feel heard while ensuring they are not. So he waited. He watched the news the way everyone did Kate's announcement, the public outpouring, the slow and careful re-emergence of the princess into public life. He watched William stand beside her at engagements, his hand at the small of her back, his jaw carrying that particular tension it had carried for months. He watched Camilla carry on as she always did, composed, measured, unbothered by the distance that had opened between her and the Wales household. And then one evening in autumn, leaves down. Skylow Thomas made a decision. He reached out to someone he trusted. Not a journalist. Not a tabloid. Someone inside the extended network of royal staff who had, over years, quietly become a conduit for things that needed to be known without being publicly exposed. That person carried the information carefully, like something fragile. It passed through two intermediaries before it reached the ear of someone close to William. Someone on his personal staff. Someone who, upon hearing it, went pale. They brought it to William first. Not Kate. The conversation between William and his aide lasted less than 20 minutes. William asked 3 questions. He received 3 answers. Then he went quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that happens when something confirms what a person suspected but hoped was wrong. He thanked the aide. He asked for Thomas's account in writing, through the appropriate channels. He kept his expression steady. Then he went to find Kate. She was in the sitting room. The children were in bed. The house was that particular kind of quiet that only settles after a full day with 3 young ones, toys put away, dishes done, the specific exhale of a home returning to itself. She was reading, or trying to. She looked up when he came in. He sat down beside her, not across from her, beside her, close. The way you sit when you're not about to deliver news from a distance, but to share something difficult from the same side. He told her about the phone call. He told her what Thomas had heard. He told her the words, what comes next, the arrangements. Let William carry this, and as he spoke them aloud in their sitting room. In the soft lamplight, something crossed Kate's face that he hadn't seen before. Not anger. Not shock, exactly. Something older than both of those things. Recognition she had known something was wrong that day. She had felt it. She had carried it for months without being able to name it, turning that 11-minute visit over and over in her mind like a stone. She couldn't put down Dot, and now she had confirmation that it was real. That she hadn't imagined it. That the discomfort she'd smoothed over and told herself was probably nothing. Probably fine. Probably Camilla, meaning well, was something. She put down her book. William took her hand, and then quietly, privately, with no cameras and no audience and no carefully chosen words, Kate broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. She was not a woman who collapsed into pieces. But the tears came, and they came in that particular way that tells you a person has been holding them back for a very, very long time. William didn't speak. He didn't try to fix it or frame it or soften it. He just held her hand. And that was the right thing. That was the only thing. Outside, the autumn wind moved through the trees. Inside, something that had been buried for months finally came up into the light. But this was not the end. Because what Thomas had shared was only part of what he knew. The rest of it, the part he had hesitated to include, the part that made even him uncomfortable, was still coming.
Thomas reveals something even bigger. A nurse got a phone call from Camilla's household asking about Kat's health and recovery without Kat's knowledge. When William reads the full story, he goes very quiet. Something changes in him. Kat is hurt, but she starts deciding who she really is and what kind of woman she wants to be after all of this.
There was something else. Thomas had been careful about how much he shared in the first account. He was not a reckless man. He understood that information, once released, could not be taken back, and that incomplete information could be just as damaging as silence. So he had offered what he felt was essential and kept the rest inside, where it had continued to press against him like something with its own weight and heat. But when the written account was requested through official channels, when it became clear that this was being taken seriously, that it wasn't being quietly shelved as his first attempt had been, he decided to be complete. The full account included something he hadn't initially disclosed after Camilla left that day. Thomas had remained at his post for another 4 hours. During that time, he became aware through the specific awareness of someone trained to notice details that the nursing staff who entered Kate's room during the remainder of that shift behaved differently than they had before. Subtly, nothing overtly wrong. But a nurse who had been warm and talkative on previous visits was quieter. A doctor who had been direct and reassuring seemed to choose his words more carefully. Small things. The kind of things a person in a hospital bed might not notice when they were tired and recovering and already carrying so much. But Thomas noticed and later. He learned something that connected these observations in a way that disturbed him. One of the senior nurses on that ward, not directly assigned to Kate, but part of the same unit, had received a call that afternoon. The call came from a number associated with the household of the then Queen consort. The content of that call was not known to Thomas directly, but the nurse, who would later speak to a colleague she trusted, said she had been asked to relay certain information about the patient's condition and recovery timeline. Not medical information exactly, the nurse had pushed back on that, but a broader sense of how things were progressing. How long recovery might realistically take. What the coming months might look like. The nurse had felt uncomfortable. She had said very little. She had ended the call and gone about her shift, but she had mentioned it. And the mention had traveled the way things travel in closed environments, until it reached someone who knew Thomas and thought he should know. When this was included in the written account carefully, attributed only as secondhand, the effect in the room where it was read was noticeable. The aide, who had gone pale before, went very still. This was no longer about an unannounced visit and some clumsy words. This suggested something more deliberate. An effort, however quiet and however limited, to gather information about Kate's condition during a period of acute vulnerability. Without her knowledge, without William's knowledge, the question of why, of what use that information might serve, was one that the aide did not feel qualified to answer, and that the document itself did not attempt to answer. It simply presented the facts as Thomas understood them and left the rest. To those better positioned to draw conclusions, William read the full account the following morning. He read it alone, at the desk in his private study, with a cup of tea that went cold beside him. When he finished, he sat for a long time. He is not a man who shows his interior life easily. He has spent his entire existence managing the distance between what he feels and what he allows others to see. But those who know him well have said that something shifted in those weeks. A new kind of quiet. A new kind of boundary gate, for her part, was processing. She is a woman of tremendous resilience. Those who have watched her over the years through the early cruelty of tabloid scrutiny, through the complexity of marrying into one of the most observed families in the world, through illness and treatment and recovery while still trying to be present for her children every single day, those people will tell you that she does not break easily. That when she does, she puts herself back together with a kind of quiet determination that is deeply private and deeply admirable. But this had cracked something in a specific place. The place where she had stored her faith in the structures around her. The assumption that even within the complexity of that family, certain lines existed and were observed. She had been wrong about that. Or at least, there was now reason to believe she had been. And the question of what to do with that, how to carry it, how to respond, whether to respond at all, was not simple. Because nothing in that world was ever simple. Every action had consequence. Every silence had consequence. Every decision rippled outward in ways that could not always be predicted or controlled. She needed time. She needed space. She needed, more than anything, to decide for herself what kind of woman she was going to be on the other side of all of this. That decision was coming. And it would surprise people. She didn't confront anyone. That surprised people who heard the story. Later, people who expected that a revelation like this would produce something sharp and visible. A public falling out. A pointed statement. Some form of declared distance. But Kate was not built for confrontation in that sense. Not because she lacked courage, she had more of it than most people would ever understand, but because she had a different understanding of what courage looked like. She had spent years watching what happened when people in that world fought their battles loudly. She had watched it fracture things that couldn't be repaired. She had watched it make everything harder for the children. She chose differently. What she did instead was quieter and, in its own way, more powerful. She drew inward. Not in retreat, in discernment. She became more deliberate about who she let close. More careful about where she placed her trust. She stopped extending the automatic good faith she had always given so generously and began requiring, from the world around her, something that actually earned it. She and William talked. More than they had before. Longer, harder conversations than the ones that had been possible in the frantic pace of the years before her illness, before everything slowed down and forced them both to face what they were carrying and what they needed, and what they would no longer tolerate their marriage under all that pressure. Did something that pressure doesn't always do. It held, more than held. People who observed them in that period said there was something different between them, something consolidated. The kind of bond that forms only when two people have sat together in the dark long enough to know they're not alone, they're William. For his part, handled the information about Camilla in the way of a man raised to manage impossible situations without erupting. He was not unaffected. He was not forgiving in any simple sense. But he was strategic in the way that his position demanded. And he understood that some truths had to be carried quietly rather than deployed as weapons. The relationship between the Wales household and Camilla did not break dramatically. But it reconfigured. Subtly, in the way that relationships reconfigure when trust has shifted. The warmth became more formal. The access became more managed. The assumption of closeness that had existed before was no longer assumed. Thomas, for his part, never spoke publicly. His account remained in private hands. He asked for nothing in return, no recognition, no protection, no reward. Those who interacted with him said he seemed, above all, relieved. Like a man who had been carrying something that didn't belong to him and had finally set it down in the right place. He left royal service the following spring. He now lives quietly. He has not given interviews. He likely never will. And Kate, the woman at the center of all of this, continued. She returned to public life with a steadiness that moved people. She stood beside William at engagements and held her children's hands and smiled. The kind of smile that is real even when it's also work. She made choices about what to take on and what to step back from. She used her illness not as something to be hidden or overcome, but as a lens, a new way of seeing what mattered and what, in the end, did not. She spoke, in one appearance, about the unexpected gifts that a period of crisis can bring, about finding clarity, about learning what you're made of when things are stripped back to their essential truth. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. The people who knew the fuller story understood what she meant. The people who didn't were moved by it anyway because it was true in the way that things are true when they've been earned through real suffering and real survival. There is a particular kind of strength that doesn't announce itself, that doesn't require an audience or a moment of triumph. It just continues day after day, morning after morning, choosing to get up and be present and love the people in front of it and keep going. Kate had always had that strength, but now she knew she had it in a way she hadn't known before. And in the end, whatever Camilla had intended by those 11 minutes, behind a closed hospital door, whatever calculation or concern or complexity had driven her there, what came out? The other side was not what she might have expected. It was not a woman diminished. It was not a family fractured. It was not a narrative rerouted. It was Kate, clearer, quieter, more certain of herself than she had ever been, standing in the light that follows the darkest kind of winter, still standing.
If this story touched your heart, give it a like. It means a lot. Subscribe to the channel. New story go up every week. Hit the bell so you never miss one. And leave a comments below. Tell us what parts of cat story hit you the hardest. What is the hospital room, the phone call, or the moment she chose silence over revenge? We read every comments, every single one. Cat story is a reminder that real strength is quiet, that real love holds, and that no matter who dark things get, you can still come out standing. Share this video with someone who need to hear that today. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. See you in the next story.